Hello, my fellow modeling and tabletop gaming enthusiasts, and welcome to the Mediocre Modeler Show. Ooh boy, it is a warm one up in the studio tonight. I got my fan and my window AC doing overtime just to kind of keep cool. I thought about maybe delaying recording this for a day or so, but decided I've been trying to do this for a couple of weeks now, so I might as well just get this done. And if you watched last week's episode, you know what this week's episode is going to be all about, because we are going to cover the lore for new Conflikt 47. And again, this is all from the articles on the Warlord community site, so there is no information, no insider information coming out of any of this stuff. Basically, just a rundown for everybody, and just kind of a little bit of my thoughts on it. I'm not going to say discussion because we can't really. I mean, you can discuss in the comments, but just kind of my thoughts on stuff. And I don't really have a whole lot of thoughts on most of these except for a couple, but we'll get into that. So let's go ahead and get started. And the first one we're going to talk about is, of course, the Soviet bloc. I say of course, but it's just there's not really any rhyme or reason. Although I did save the two at the end are saved for the end particularly, but the first three we're just going to kind of go over. So we're going to start with the Soviets. So the Soviets are one of the three factions that don't have direct rift access. They don't have a rift in their area. That, of course, in their area, within their borders. Of course, the only two factions that have a direct access to the rift are the U.S. and the Axis. But Joseph Stalin has one heck of a spy network, and he's managed to get quite a lot of information out of Los Alamos and Dresden. So he kind of was hip to the rift pretty darn quick. But their first encounters, the Soviets' first encounters with rift tech were when fighting the Axis, when they encountered their rift weapons as well as the rift enhanced genetic engineering projects that the Axis were undertaking. So the way that the Soviets were able to gain access to rift tech is kind of through two different ways. So they reverse engineered Axis rift tech by just taking what they'd managed to defeat or steal, reverse engineering that. They were very good at that. In real world examples, there was a B-29 bomber. Many of you know the B-29 Super Fortress, manufactured by Boeing, probably the heaviest American bomber that was actually in service. That was deployed during the Second World War. The Soviets really wanted to get their hands on it, and they kept pushing for the U.S. to send them B-29s through Lend-Lease. But the U.S. never did. We sent them, lots of M4 Sherman tanks, M3 Lees, B-25s, A-20s, A-26s, P-39 Airacobras. We sent them all kinds of stuff, but we never sent them any B-29s. Well, there was a B-29 that was on a long-duration mission over Japan and had to divert to the Russian mainland. And the Soviets, I don't know if they interred the crew or sent the crew back, but kept the B-29, and they basically reverse engineered it to come up with the Tupolev TU. It's either the TU-4 or the TU-2. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was basically they reverse engineered the entire thing. Of course, ran into difficulties because it was manufactured with, I'm going to say standard measurements or imperial measurements, being an inch, but all their manufacturing was set up to do it metric. So they ran into some issues, obviously had to modify it to use their own engines and armament, but it was a very well kept secret until I believe the May Day parade or Victory Parade in 1946 or 1947, when out of nowhere a flight of these Tupolevs flew overhead, and the West had no idea that they had managed to reverse engineer the B-29. So they were very good at that. In addition to what they were able to reverse engineer from the Axis, again, Stalin's spy network comes into play here. So they were able to get a lot of information out of Los Alamos to enhance their own rift tech as well as genetic manipulation, we'll call it. In May of 1944, so May 1st of 1944, according to, you know, the Konflikt 47 timeline, is when the Soviets actually broke from the Allies. So they became their own faction at that point. So a couple of questions that I've kind of come up with. So is Soviet Rift tech the same? You know, is it the same as the Allies? How are they able to? And that's kind of some of the questions that come into some of the other factions that we're going to talk about. Is they don't. So is Rift energy? Is that something that you can generate with certain components that are available in this timeline without access to a Rift? It's just the Rift, the signals coming out of the Rift tell them how to generate, how to make this stuff, or, you know, because when I think Rift tech or Rift energy, I'm thinking you have to harness the power of the Rift, so you have to have access to it. But is it something different where you can generate this power, you know, with a special generator that you manufacture? I don't know. But that might kind of explain how some of these other nations, these other factions, are able to manufacture Rift tech without direct access to the Rift. So, are the Soviets really making their own new designs, or is this actual Rift tech stuff? But again, that comes into what is the Rift, what is Rift energy, and how is Rift tech powered? The Soviets' main goal on the European continent and the Asian continent is to make their way into Germany and take over Dresden and get access to the Rift. So they're doing everything they can, employing everything that they have available to them to do that. And since they broke with the Allies, they are fighting a war on all fronts. So they've got the axis to the west. Excuse me. They've got the Japanese, the Commonwealth, and the United States to the east. But they've got the communist Chinese as their allies. But of course, the Japanese and the U.S. and the Commonwealth are not allied with each other. The U.S. and the Commonwealth are, but the Japanese are not. So they're fighting a war on all fronts. And of course, they've got their whole list of Rift tech. They've got their, light walkers like the Cossack light walker. They've got their big heavy walkers like the Mammoth. They've got their, I'm going to terribly mispronounce this, the Zhukovoy weapons, sort of their sonic weapons. They've got like on the modified T-34s. I think there are some daughters of the motherland that employ sort of infantry or man-portable sonic weapons. Of course, they've got their armored infantry as well. They've got their heavy armor, the Mark 1 and the Mark 2. The Mark 1 is kind of more designed for an anti-armor role. Now, just kind of an interesting story. I remember years ago when I first found out about Konflikt 47, years before I got into it. And we're talking at least, 8, 9, maybe even 10 years ago. I was on the website for a gaming store that unfortunately is no longer around because it was a great online store. You could buy like 3-pack blisters of the Soviet infantry, and I'm like, man, that looks kind of cool. Almost did it. Kind of wish I would have at that point, but hindsight, They've also had their share of genetic experiments, like with their Morazgul Siberian terror troops, and as well as the Ursus infantry, some goddamn war bears, some werebears. I mean, they're like the Schreckwolfen that the Axis have. I point over there because I finished a group of Schreckwolfen earlier. They're freaking bears. I mean, that kind of makes me just want to start a Soviet army. I read the article for the Soviet bloc and almost was like, God dang it, I didn't want to start a Soviet army too. Probably will happen eventually. Because of the Ursus infantry, because god dang werebears. I mean, that's just cool. So that's kind of the rundown on the Soviets. Yeah, I think that's kind of cool. Werebears. Okay, so next we're going to take a look at the British Commonwealth. First thing I am going to note is it is the British Commonwealth. It is called the British Commonwealth. It is not the UK for a reason. It includes England, of course, all of the countries that are in the United Kingdoms of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland. I say Ireland, but technically, well, at that point it would have been one. But you got Ireland, Northern Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, and any of the other Commonwealth nations. This was kind of a design choice. at the time, because I can't remember where I heard this, but, and it might have been from Pete, they couldn't do all of that they wanted to from the start. So they call it the Commonwealth so they can break it out later. And again, that comes into play the idea of having the downloadable PDFs for Army lists so that down the road they can break out. Okay, you want to run Canadians? Here's the Army list. You want to run Australians? Here's the Army list. So yeah, so it's done this way so that they can more easily break it out further on down the road. So, the British Commonwealth is in dire straits, but all of the territories, colonies of the Commonwealth are answering to Whitehall. So, the early Rift developments were coming pretty fast and furious from the US, but through the Lend-Lease program, but they've kind of slowed a little bit. But British ingenuity and pluckiness has adapted things from there. So they've taken what they were able to get from the US and they've made their own adaptations, which again, the British Commonwealth does not have direct access to a rift. So it, again, leads into the questions from before is how do they power their rift tech? So there's got to be some way that they can create rift energy in order to power this tech, or Rift Tech has provided information on how to power it using contemporary components, something like that. But they're able to continue to create their own using what they have available to them, which is not directly Rift energy. In the worlds of computing and automation, they have made massive advances. So the automated infantry is a big example of that. So artificial intelligence is something that they've made a lot of strides forward in, and they're not sharing that with anyone. So even though the US is their ally and they've shared Rift Tech, the British have not shared their advances into artificial intelligence, right? So we look at Lend-Lease like the Grizzly chassis of medium walker. So you've got the Grizzly, the Kodiak, the Bruin. I know there's some other ones that I'm forgetting. Of course, the Hornet, which is a British development of the Grizzly. So the British have access to all of that because they've gotten that from the US. I think that they need to share the Hornet with the Marine Corps in the South Pacific. Purely greedy reasons. And that's part of why I kind of tried to keep floating the idea of a Lend-Lease rule so that allied nations could, you could use one unit from an allied nation is in your army, like pay an extra points cost or something. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I think that'd be really cool because the Hornet, I think, would be perfect, as I said before, for jungle fighting Marines in the South Pacific. Anyway, they've also managed to automate their manufacturing. So they've got automated factories that are pumping out all this Rift Tech, which means that there are more bodies available. So is that more meat for the grinder? Which leads you to wonder maybe that there is a possibility of rebellion within the Commonwealth because the trade unions and the labor organizations are kind of at odds with Whitehall. Haven't really heard much about Sir Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister at the time, but that could just be because there was no information in the article. Just pure speculation. But I think it kind of laid the seeds for that a little bit, just because, again, with referring specifically to trade unions and labor organizations, and then the automation of the workforce is you have that many more bodies that are available to be pressed into service on the front lines. But again, they've got the automated infantry. Who knows? And again, as I mentioned, they're still allied with the United States, but both sides are starting to get kind of cagey about things. Lend-Lease is still a thing. It's just not as much as flowing back and forth. So, of course, the British have their, their special units like the automated infantry as well as the EM2 assault rifle. The Merlin Walker, big Merlin heavy walker, as well as the Hornet Walker, which I mentioned before, sort of the derivative of or a variant of the Grizzly chassis. Of course, you've got the British War Dogs, which look really cool. They've got their heavy armored infantry, their armored infantry with the Galahads, but I don't think they have any specialized paratroopers or airborne forces, like the British, not the British. The Axis have the Falcon Fallschirmjäger, as well as the Italians have a sort of airborne troop, and of course the Americans have the Fireflies. Which there is a new deep dive article out right now about the Fireflies. I totally lost my train of thought there. It's a pretty good read, so definitely go check that out. Okay, so third in our list of factions for Conflikt 47 is going to be the Empire of Japan. And again, this is the third and final nation that does not have direct access to Rift Tech. So the Japanese are fighting the US in the Pacific, and they're fighting the Soviets and the Communist Chinese on the mainland. When I say mainland, I mean continental Asia. Excuse me. Now, their access to Rift Tech early on came from the Axis. But, again, relations have broken down pretty good between the Axis and the Japanese Empire. So, again, the Japanese have had to take what they were able to get and work with it from there. Reverse engineering, experimenting, so on and so forth. So, again, it's the same thing, same question. What is Rift Energy? What is Rift Tech? How is it powered? How does it work? Nobody really knows. So that's just kind of one of those things that sticks in my mind. It's like, well, how do they keep making all this stuff? How are the Axis and the U.S. not just like dominating everything because they're the only ones that excuse me. The Japanese citizenry remains very loyal to the Emperor. And from what I know, strictly historically speaking, Emperor Hirohito at the time was a very interesting individual. I believe, he's an avid... Most of what I know is later in life, it's like an avid marine biologist, which I think is pretty cool. And again, my opinion from the little research that I have done over the years, he was not necessarily in favor of going to war with the U.S. The impression that I got was that he was more pressed into it and convinced by his military leaders. So, kind of interesting. But again, no specific mention was made of the Emperor, just that the Japanese citizens remain loyal, steadfastly loyal to the Emperor. The big breakthrough for the Japanese with Rift Tech was into stealth and phasing in and out of the physical world. So we've got the Japanese have the ghost attack squads. Excuse me. Which their developments into Rift Tech allow them to sort of phase in and out of this physical world. They can walk through obstacles, be completely unseen, which is kind of interesting. And if you look at the artwork that they created for this edition, again, the Stefan Kapinski artwork is incredible. And hint, anybody from Warlord that is watching, please sell that artwork as prints. I will buy it and I will frame it. I mean, I got a perfect spot here to put all 5 of them. It's going to be just awesome. They look incredible. But the way the helmet's like an old-fashioned not like the bulb diving helmet, but you see some more like an early high altitude helmet where it's basically just like a cone they put on their head with the window and they're bolted in there. It's like, well, yeah, you'd probably have to have like your own oxygen supply bolted in there if you're going to be phasing in and out of reality or the physical world, I guess. They've got sort of their island fortress on Iwo Jima that is sort of the heart of their Rift Tech development. And it's said that no one, friend or foe, has lived to see the island and tell the tale of it. So lots of interesting stuff going on in the caves of Iwo Jima that I'd kind of like to find out about. In addition to their ghost attack squads, they've of course got their battle frame heavy infantry. They have their Shibito corpse squads, which are essentially the Japanese version of the Toten Corps. Although it is interesting to note, if you look at the models for the Shibito squads, I'm sorry, my pronunciation of these are terrible. It doesn't include just Japanese soldiers. It also includes Allied soldiers that have fallen and been reanimated. So whether that's just hey, they're dead. We might as well use them, as opposed to the Axis as maybe sense of racial or genetic superiority. Who knows? Just interesting to know. But they're freaking zombies, so that's cool. They also have the export model of the Hushrek Walker. Again, apologies for my pronunciation. I think they call it the Locust. And then they've also got their Shiboru weapons, which are basically project high strength pressure waves that can crush pressure, steel and bone and flesh alike. And they've developed these in all different sizes, so they're man portable rifles to being mounted on tanks. So all kinds of stuff can be used for that. They've got the Sasori light walkers, so like the little scuttling scorpion walkers as well. So that is the Empire of Japan. So next we're going to move on to our, of course, the United States and the Axis. So we're going to start with the United States, okay? So the United States were the discoverers of the rift with their experiments into atomic energy and trying to create an atomic bomb at Los Alamos Laboratory. At this point, Los Alamos National Laboratory in our current timeline. So as part of the Manhattan Project, their experiments led to the opening of the rift, and these signals and stuff coming through the rift told them how to create it, and that's what they ended up dropping on Dresden, which then opened the second rift. There is a really good read, again, on the community website. It's an intelligence report from one of the generals to President Roosevelt, and then a report from a reconnaissance pilot that flew over Dresden after the bomb was dropped, and some interesting observations. So that is something to definitely give that a read. At the time that the rift was discovered, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President of the United States, was in very dire straits. Basically, had no hope health-wise. So he decided to enter the rift, and he emerged completely healed and declared it to be divine intervention of God. This, of course, led to mass religious fervor across the United States, and the war being declared a crusade by FDR. I'm going to wait till the end and discuss that real quick. So the industrial might of the United States as well, combined with the Rift Tech just cranking out weapons and vehicles for the U.S. and the Allies, so the Commonwealth. The Americans, for lack of a better term, this is my terminology. This is kind of how I view it, and I'll explain this in a little bit. The Americans are basically the religious zealots of Konflikt 47. So of course the units that the Americans have, they've got the Fireflies and their M1, X1, X2 Thompsons. I'm really excited to see those in action, see what they're capable of doing. We've got Tesla weapons, so Tesla Shermans, Tesla weapons on the new Linebacker. We've got the Tesla anti-tank weapons, which look cool. I need to get one. They're on M5 Stewards, they're on M8 Scout cars, all that good stuff. Of course, we've got our medium walkers, the Grizzly, the Linebacker, the main ones, and of course we've got the light walkers, the Coyote, the Guardian, the Jackal, or the Coyote and the Guardian are the same thing, I think, except for like one minor weapon difference. The Jackal is the jump version of the Coyote chassis, and then of course you got the Pond Skaters. And then the U.S. has not exempted itself from genetic experimentation, where we have the Paragon squads. Speaking of Paragons, I'm working on a Paragon squad right now, and I noticed something the other day. The new symbol for the United States is oddly present on the shoulder pads of the Paragon squads. I mean, it's like pretty much the same. And if you look at the artwork again of the Firefly, it's the same. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. I was like, that's been around for a while. And I think that's on the new decal sheets for the Americans and all that. So, I personally am very non-religious. I am borderline anti-religion. And it's not necessarily all religion. I personally do not place stock in religious belief. That is not to say that I think less of anyone that does, until the point that they try to push it upon me. But that's not my thing. Okay. Mainly I mean, my issues are mainly with extremist Christianity, but we're going to leave it at that. So when I first read that the U.S. were sort of just very religiously inclined, and believing that all of this was divine intervention in the Word of God, at first I was a little bit soured. Just again, if you saw my interview with Pete, these are the personal issues that I'm talking about. They're not really issues; it's just my personal held beliefs. But after reading through the article 2 or 3 times, this thought occurred to me. It's like, okay, so the Americans are the religious fanatics of Konflikt 47, and they believe that they're on a mission from God, Blues Brothers style. So, what lengths are they willing to go to purge the Axis, to purge the heathen communists that they will claim is in the name of God? What atrocities will they commit? What acts are they going to do that hasten the end? Because remember, the tagline for this edition of Konflikt 47 is "This is not war, this is the end." And I started thinking, man, that's actually pretty genius. Because if they've got this, belief that God is on their side, and a lot of this is founded in American religious extremism in the real world. We are, a nation founded by Puritans. So it's kind of like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, I get where they're coming from. And it's like, that's actually brilliant. Because they're just going to do all these awful things thinking that they're the good guys, and they're doing this because it's what God wants, and they're just going to just help destroy the world. It's like, okay, that kind of plays into the theme of it. So okay, I can get behind that. I will play my detachment of Marines are not necessarily so overly religious inclined, but they're fighting for mom, apple pie, and baseball kind of thing. It's like if I don't necessarily like a piece of the lore, I don't have to incorporate that into how I play, or my play style, or how my army is made, unless there's some sort of national rule which I doubt there is. It might have something in the name of it, but won't necessarily be that way. And then excuse me. And that's how you can do with any game. If there's some particular piece of lore that bothers you don't necessarily like, but you still like the rest of the game, you can just omit that piece in the lore of your article, the lore of your army. So this isn't necessarily me just ragging on, it's not me at all ragging on how they wrote it. It makes sense. And the way that whether it's right or wrong, the way that I've rationalized it in my head, I like it. I like the idea of it, and I think it plays into the theme very well. So that is my thoughts. Again, roast me if you want to, but those are just my beliefs. That was my initial reaction, and where I came to be cool with it, and work. It's like, okay, this works. I can make some sense out of that, and it's going to play in. Again, any armies that I play don't necessarily have to follow that to the T. Cool. Okay, so the last one, and I saved this for the end specifically, of course, is the Axis, because I know some of the changes that they made to the lore for the Axis kind of ruffled some feathers, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Okay, so the second rift was opened in Dresden when the atomic bomb was nuked. My notes literally say second rift opened when Dresden was nuked, and that's how the Axis gained, or the Nazis at the time gained access to Rift Tech, and they were the first to really capitalize on it. So the article mentions a couple of interesting things. With knowledge of the Rift out in the open now, an organization known as the Green Vault, as we've all been made aware of, cast aside the need for secrecy. They felt there was no need for secrecy, and basically overthrew the National Socialists and took over Nazi Germany, reformed the image, and then all of their allies at the time scooped them up, folded them all into one Axis power. So the Green Vault was noted to have been around for a long time. I think it mentioned since the time of August the Strong, who was the Elector of Saxony and the King of Poland in the late 17th century into the 18th century. He was born in 1670, died in 1733. So quite some time, 3 centuries. They had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, which I love conspiratorial secret organization stuff like that. So I'm kind of like, okay, that's cool. All right. Did they know about the rift? I mean, who are the Green Vault? What are they doing? And I've been assured that they are quite horrendous people. So it's interesting to note again in the article that it mentions that, you know, basically all the Nazis have just been purged. But there are still politicians and generals that are vying for position and favor. But the average citizen life really hasn't changed at all. It's still quite terrible. So it's pretty much meet the new boss, same as the old boss in Germany and places such as Hungary, Italy, things like that. So German Rift Tech, or Axis Rift Tech, excuse me, is, you know, kind of intertwined with the occult studies of the Green Vault over the last 3 centuries, which is really, I think, kind of interesting. And again, they are fighting a war on 2 fronts. You've got the British Commonwealth and the US and probably the French on the west, and then of course you've got the Soviet Union to the east. And it is very much still a war of survival at this point. I mean, it's just kind of an ebb and flow of attacks and counterattacks, ceding territory, winning back territory, things like that. But the goal of the Green Vault is either complete and utter victory or total destruction of it and its forces. So the Germans, as I mentioned, well, it was the Germans at the time, were really the first to fully and truly harness Rift Tech and Rift energy. So you have things like the Totem Core, the reanimated corpses of their dead soldiers. You have, of course, Schwerfeld gravity field projectors, which are pretty cool. I think just, you know, go out there and destroy stuff with gravity. Cool stuff. Of course, they've got their armored infantry. They were kind of the first to develop armored infantry and kind of refine it, you know, that German precision engineering. And then, of course, now you've got the Stahltruppen, sort of the heavier armored infantry. And then, of course, the genetic manipulation, genetic engineering. You've got your Nachtjagers, your Nachtalben, and your Schreckwoffen. So the Axis powers are armed to the gills, armed to the teeth, and they're out for bear. So this one has been somewhat controversial. And I'm gonna preface this with all thoughts and opinions expressed are those of me, are solely my own thoughts and opinions. They are not reflective of any groups or associations or companies, organizations that I may be in any way, shape, or form affiliated with. So if you have something to say in regards to my thoughts, just leave it down below. Don't go yelling at somebody else that, you know, wherever. There's been a lot of discussion since this first kind of came out, and I think it was release day is when someone noticed that the first reference to the Green Vault, which was made in the descriptions of one of, I think it was the Axis starter army. And it mentioned that the Nazis had been cast aside and the Green Vault had taken over. And again, as I mentioned, it's really kind of meet the new boss, same as the old boss kind of situation. But a lot of people were speculating as to why were the Nazis no longer the bad guys. Some seemed pretty upset about that. Some of the things that I've said, and this wasn't a post, it was more of a discussion. There really wasn't any anger or animosity, but just a comment that it fundamentally changes the nature of the game, and it's no longer a World War II game. And I disagree with that, because at this point, is it really even World War II? I mean, yes, it's based very closely on the Second World War and based on the bolt action system, which is a World War II game. But I mean, yeah, it is still World War II, but it's not our World War II. Because the thing you got to keep in mind is, there was a point of divergence in 1944 when the Rift was discovered. Some may argue it was even earlier than that with the Green Vault in the time of August the Strong, the late 17th century, early 18th century. So it's not necessarily our timeline. It's not necessarily our universe. It just happened to be the same up to a point. But at the point that the Rift is discovered and that things diverge, the timeline split, it is something else entirely. But I don't think that it fundamentally changes it from a World War II game, because it's still based very much in World War II, the events and locations that happened in World War II, as well as the people and the equipment. I mean, that war game it's the equipment, it's the cool stuff, it's the tanks, it's a Sherman tank with a different turret, it's an M1 Thompson with an additional attachment. They're still using 30 round stick magazines that fire a 45 ACP round. It's just using some sort of energy field to make it faster, or maybe add an explosive charge to it. Who knows? So I really don't think that it changes it from a World War II game. It's weird World War, and my argument was kind of, well, who's to say if the war had continued past August of 1945 that something like this wouldn't have happened? Yeah, that's a little far-fetched, I'll be honest with you, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, hell, we invented nuclear weapons. I mean, look at all the stuff that we've done. Look at all the stuff that we've invented to make it easier for us to kill each other. So we can do all kinds of crazy stuff when we put our minds to it. We've been to the moon. I mean, that still blows my mind, the fact that it was the technological dark age of 1969. We sent 3 men to the moon and brought them back. And then 2 missions later, we sent 3 men around the moon in a malfunctioning spacecraft and managed to bring them home. We could do all kinds of stuff. So anyway, it's still weird World War II. It's just the Nazis by a different name. But not really the Nazis. Okay, so it's not I take that back. It's not the Nazis by a different name, but the people are just as bad. And they have the same overall goal of just controlling the world. Hopefully they'll just... But, yeah. They're still awful. I mean, again, they're trying to do the same thing. They're just as bad, if not worse. I haven't been told anything specifically, but I've just been told that they are just as bad and probably worse. So it's really just World War II in a different color. So I really don't disagree with that. Or I don't agree that it changes the nature of the game from a World War II game. Anyway, so I mean, just mostly, I don't necessarily want to say outrage, but just kind of nerd rage that the Nazis are no longer a part of it, which, whatever. I don't get why people are upset about that. It's like, you got to progress the story somehow. You got to progress the game somehow. I mean, with the amount of investment that Warlord's putting into this, it's like, why not make the story a little more interesting? I mean, I like the idea of the Green Vault. I like the fact that, because like I mentioned before, it's like these shadow organizations that have been around for hundreds of years, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And that's the other thing, is they've been around for so long, they were pulling the strings to create the Nazis. So the Nazis really were the Green Vault in disguise. So there you go. But no, I like that idea of how, yeah, they've been pulling the strings anyway, and they've been doing all this stuff behind the scenes, manipulating people, manipulating events to their end goal, which now they are able to reveal themselves and pursue their goals. So, yeah. Again, solely the thoughts and opinions of the Mediocre Modeler, not reflective of any other group, organization, or company that I may or may not be affiliated with in any such capacity. But those are just my thoughts on it. And, there's a lot of discussion. Me talking here isn't going to convince anyone otherwise. Anybody else talking to me isn't going to convince me otherwise. I'm just excited to get the game. I'm just excited to learn more. Kind of interested to find out what this week's community article is going to be. Hopefully a little more gameplay mechanics. I'm kind of interested in that. Also, I'm kind of hoping we might see a little bit more previews of the miniatures. I know there's been at least 4 or 5 outlets that have excuse me, have received preview copies of the miniatures, and I know there's even one that has the rule book in their hands. I think it was on tabletop. Did a short interview with Pete last week, and they've got miniatures, and they actually had a preview copy of the A5, the smaller rule book. So that's pretty cool. I'm really excited when they can start sharing a little bit of that. I think it's gonna be pretty cool. So yeah, but yeah, I'm hoping we get more gameplay articles soon. That's what I'm hoping for. We've got a little over a month, I think, until official launch, which they said Warlord Open Day or weekend, I think, is like 27th of September. So we've got a little bit over a month until the official release. And so we should start seeing copies in people's hands a little sooner, potentially. I've got a little bit of uncertainty regarding when I will receive mine, just due to the tariff situation here in the United States, and the ending of the de minimis exemption. Currently, tariffs on products from the UK are 10%, so I'm looking at an additional $50-some. It's not a terrible chunk. I'm just not looking forward to it because, pardon my French, I think it's bullshit. So yeah, we'll kind of have to see where that goes. But you never know, because it could show up and they're going to charge like $600 in tariffs, which would be an absolute ridiculous move. I would not be able to afford to pay that, so I would have to. And that's the thing, because then if you don't take delivery, they still charge you the tariffs. This is the shit that keeps me up at night. I'm sorry for my language. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night that we have to deal with. It's like, this is a game. I just want to play with my cool miniatures, push them across the table, and roll dice. I don't want to have to worry about the freaking geopolitics of some... Yes. Anyway, so that's the lore for Conflict 47. Like it, dislike it, it is what it is. I'm on board with it. I know some of you will probably disagree with my liking of it, and you feel free to comment down below. Cool. Whatever. I mean, if you like it, awesome. If you don't, hey, good for you. I'm not going to let it affect my gameplay. I'm going to continue to enjoy it. So that is how it is. Yeah. So, as always, hit those links down below. Facebook, Instagram, as well as my Warlord Games affiliate link. What else we got? Wisconsin Maritime Museum. We are, again, getting closer and closer to when the Cobia will be going into dry dock. So check out the Wisconsin Maritime Museum to stay up to date on what's going on with that. And if you are able and so willing, please consider donating to help dry dock the Cobia. Yeah. So as always, folks, thank you very much for watching. I sure do appreciate you watching. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe if you are so inclined. And until next time, may your paints be thin, your brushes be pointy, and your dice be hot.